This episode is brought to you by Early Innings, an anthology of the first 4 years of the Twin Bill. Featuring over 200 pages of baseball poetry, short stories, essays, interviews, comics, and art, it tells the story of what it means to love baseball today. The Athletic's Tyler Kepner said, like a box of ballpark Cracker Jack, there's a delightful surprise on every page of the Twin Bill's Early Innings. This is a collection to be savored, a loving and lyrical celebration of the art of baseball. Early Innings is available now from 406 Press. This episode is also brought to you by Ben Shahan's Short Relief. It asks the question of what happens when men are not ready to give up that boys' game, the national pastime. In 9 stories, he traces the stories of a minor league pitcher holding on to his last shred of hope for promotion to the show, little leaguers' formative experiences, and a host of men and boys in between. Short Relief is out on 406 Press and available at 406press.com. Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolohan. Only 12 numbers have been retired in Dodgers history, including legendary names like Robinson, Koufax, and Campanella, but also Jim Gilliam. If you're asking, who is Jim Gilliam, I also didn't really know. But after reading Stephen Dittmore's biography, Jim Gilliam, the Forgotten Dodger, I learned just how vital Gilliam was to 4 Dodger titles and how he became a beloved Dodger figure in history. Stephen was great. Enjoy. Welcome back to the podcast, Steve. If you've not been officially on before, we originally talked, my gosh, probably back in January. It was a great conversation, so we're going to try to recreate some magic here right now. Technical difficulties, but we had a great time talking about Jim Gilliam, and we're going to do it again right now.
Excellent. I'm always happy to talk about Jim Gilliam.
Yes, great. So I always like to start off by asking, where does this idea initially come from?
I was born in Los Angeles. I'm a lifelong Dodgers fan, always been a fan of baseball. And as I progressed in an academic career, I always had this interest in writing. I had 2 degrees in journalism before I got my PhD, and I really wanted to write a book. I didn't know what topic, but I knew it was going to be about baseball. I hoped it would be about the Dodgers. And as I kept reading more and more about things around the Negro Leagues and the Dodgers, I started realizing that Jim Gilliam really was someone that was at the front step of a lot of monumental things in baseball, both playing in the Negro Leagues, becoming the first black base coach in baseball history. And I remember him from my childhood in Los Angeles. I grew up in the 70s there, and I remember him being a part of the team as the first base coach. I remember when he passed away in 1978, and the Dodgers wore the 19 on their sleeve in the 1978 World Series to commemorate his passing. And as I started reading more about statistics and things like that, I realized, you know what? Jim Gilliam played on 7 World Series teams. He won 4 World Series championships with the Dodgers. Only Johnny Padres and Sandy Koufax were on 4 World Series winning teams for the Dodgers. And Koufax didn't play in 55, and Padres didn't play in 65. So Gilliam is the only person in Dodger history to actually see time in 4 World Series winning teams for the Dodgers. And all of this just kind of conspired that this is an interesting story. And it has kind of a disappointment to it in that Gilliam never received a single vote for the National Baseball Hall of Fame. And I'm not going to argue that he's a Hall of Fame player. I don't know that he was, but certainly he deserves some more prominent recognition in the sport.
Before we get going too far here, I always love to talk about the research process.
Sure.
What went into the research?
So I started this in 2019, really not knowing how I was going to do this, where I was going to go, how I was going to access people, how I was going to access subjects. Working at a university, I was at the University of Arkansas at the time. Working there, I had access to interlibrary loan. I had access to interlibrary loan librarians who are fabulous magicians that if I gave them, hey, I found something about a reference to some article in Black Sports in 1953 May, but I don't know the page number, they were actually able to track that stuff down. And so I had a clear advantage from a research standpoint, having access to those things, databases, access to Black newspapers and things from that era. That was kind of the secondary research part. The primary research part, I just kept talking to people and they're like, hey, I know this person. And through a series of just my professional connections, I was able to get to Peter O'Malley. I was able to get to Fred Clare. I was able to get to Bill White, former National League president and a member of the 1960s Cardinals team. And one thing that I took a flyer on, it actually bore some fruit, was there's these websites that allow you to find addresses of retired players, that people that send through the mail autograph requests and things like that. And so I subscribed to a couple of these things, got some addresses, looked up players from that era, and I just blindly sent a letter.
Just sending that's amazing.
And I wasn't asking for an autograph. I wasn't sending a baseball card or anything like that. I just sent a letter and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Here's my contact information. And, when you pick up the phone and all of a sudden Al Ferrara from the 1960s Dodgers is calling you, it's kind of wild. It's like, oh, hey, this worked. And Facebook was good. I was able to connect to people through that process. It was a hodgepodge of things that actually turned out pretty well. The one thing I've learned about the research process, and I'm sure you are very well aware of this, you're never done. You just run out of time. And that's just where it was. I mean, there are other people that I wish I would have been able to get in touch with. Some things I've learned since the book went to press that I was like, gosh, I wish I could have incorporated that.
Let's get back to Jim and his early life. What is Jim's upbringing like?
Yeah. Jim was born 1928 in segregated Nashville. Grew up in the North Nashville, the black section of Nashville. And he was born at the all-black hospital, the Meharry Medical Center that exists there. Went to the all-black segregated schools, Ford Green Elementary, Washington Middle School, Pearl High School. Never graduated high school. He dropped out at the 11th grade, and he had really gravitated towards sports at a very young age, was very interested in baseball, did play some football, but really was interested in baseball, became pretty good. The ballpark in Nashville at the time, Sulphur Dell, was a place where he just went to and would help out doing whatever it was, just kind of hanging around the ballpark. And a gentleman that kind of had the keys to Sulphur Dell, if you will, Willie White, welcomed him in. And Willie opened the gates of Sulphur Dell really to any kid, regardless of race. Black, white, didn't matter. And so Jim would play pickup sandlot games, things like that, in and around the areas of Nashville and in Sulphur Dell. His father had passed away when he was 2 months old, and so he grew up without a father. He grew up without any siblings. His mother went to work, was raised a lot by his grandparents, both maternal and paternal grandparents, kind of in the North Nashville section there. His mother's family had a history of playing baseball, and so there was some influence from his mother's name's Catherine. From her side of the family, Catherine Duvall was her maiden name. And then the Baltimore Elite Giants had their spring training in Nashville. And there was also a team, there was a semi-pro team that he played for at age 14, which was the Nashville Crawfords, which was probably just named after the Pittsburgh Crawfords. Gilliam in 1945, his age 16 season, he played for the Nashville Black Vols of the Negro Southern League. And he was a professional, traveled around the Negro Southern League, and then in 1946, he joined the Baltimore Elite Giants because they had their spring training in Nashville. They had been the Nashville Elite Giants, moved to Baltimore, but they kept the ties to Nashville. And that's how he got in. He didn't play much that year, 1946, but he was part of the roster, and he traveled around, and eventually toward the end of the 46 season started to get some action. And by the 47 season, he was kind of entrenched in that and spent 4 years, 47, 48, 49, and 50 with the Baltimore Elite Giants.
So at this time, this is now obviously post integration, post Jackie Robinson. I mean, it's an interesting time in the Negro Leagues and for black ball players in general. It's not all sunshine and roses and
No.
And in fact, there's a little bit of a unofficial quota going on at the time. How does this all affect Jim and his path to the major leagues?
It absolutely impacted him. March of 1950. Let me back up one more step. So after Jackie Robinson and Satchel Paige and Larry Doby and the other kind of that first wave of integration, the black press started to pay more attention to how those players were performing in the major leagues than how things were going in the Negro Leagues. And so that led to less coverage of the Negro Leagues. Attendance started to dwindle. As a result, owners needed infusion of cash, and so often they would sell their contracts to major league teams, and that was a way that they could raise capital and continue to operate. So you see this talent drain from the Negro Leagues going to Major League Baseball. At the same time, there is still you reference this quota, which is how many black players is a major league team willing to put on the field? And remember, not every major league team integrates until the end of the 1950s. It was the Boston Red Sox that were the last team to integrate, and that wasn't until 1959, 12 years after Jackie Robinson debuted. But as black players, ones and twos started appearing and entering major league rosters, there was kind of this plateau where there wasn't as many black players being sold off. And so in 1950, March of 1950, Gilliam was one of about a half a dozen players that went to a tryout in Haines City, Florida, to join the Chicago Cubs. And the Cubs actually passed on Gilliam, even though Gilliam at this point in time is 21 years old. This would be his age 22 season that he's coming up on, 1950, or age 21 season, age 21 season. And he's clearly a talent because he's been in the Negro League's East-West All-Star game. He has played on the Negro League championship team for the 1949 season. So he's clearly got some skills, and the black press is talking about that. Cubs pass on him. They took Gene Baker, who ultimately would help integrate the Cubs with Ernie Banks, just not have quite the career that Gilliam had. And Gilliam goes back to the Baltimore Eli Giants. At the end of the 1950 season, the Dodgers purchase him and Joe Black and a pitcher named Leroy Farrell for $11,000 from the Baltimore Eli Giants. And Gilliam joins Montreal for 51 and 52. And I think what the quota piece on this is the Dodgers already had Campanella, Jackie Robinson, Don Newcomb, and then in 1952, they brought up Joe Black, who became the Rookie of the Year in 1952. So there's already 4 black players in the clubhouse. And the Dodgers were able to keep Gilliam in Montreal, despite what I argue is he being a better player than the white reserves that the Dodgers kept on the roster. And it's no knock on Bobby Morgan or Rocky Bridges or any of the other kind of bench players that the Dodgers kept. But you wonder if, as Gilliam won the 1952 MVP in the International League, as he had a very dominant season in 1951, if he might not have helped the Dodgers win one more game in 51 to avoid that horrendous playoff series that they had with the Giants. One more win would have done the trick. They wouldn't have had Bobby Thompson, wouldn't be a thing. 1952, they lost the World Series in 7 games to the Yankees. Maybe he would have made a difference. Maybe he wouldn't have. I don't know. Nobody knows. But it wasn't until 1953 then that the Dodgers put Gilliam in the lineup, moved Jackie Robinson from second base to third base, sent Billy Cox effectively to the bench, and now you had 3 blacks in the starting lineup when you could have a 4th on the mound. But it wouldn't be until 1954 when the Dodgers actually started greater than 50% as black players, when Sandy Amorose was in left field, Jackie at third, Gilliam at second, either Black or Newcomb on the mound, and then Campanella behind the plate. So I do think that the quota system, or kind of the unspoken quota system, prevented Gilliam from seeing the majors until 1953. And that's unfortunate because those were years that he was productive in the International League. He debuts in 53, wins the National League Rookie of the Year, has about 100 walks, leads the majors or leads the National League, at least in plate appearances, leads the National League with 17 triples, walks roughly twice as much as he strikes out, nearly 100 walks that season. So he was clearly a major league talent in 1953, and it's hard not to think that he was a major league talent before that.
Yeah, it's a good argument there. You mentioned he takes over second base where Jackie Robinson, no small shoes to take over there. What is their relationship like?
So Jackie and Gilliam were roommates that first year that Gilliam was on the Dodgers in 1953. By all accounts, they had a positive relationship. Jackie went down to Puerto Rico right before training camp or spring training in 1953 because Gilliam was playing in the Puerto Rican Winter League, and he goes down there and Rachel's with him and they meet Jim and they're, everybody's talking about, is Gilliam going to move Jackie Robinson? Remember, Jackie Robinson has played all over. He was a shortstop with the Kansas City Monarchs. The Dodgers put him at first base in 47, a position he'd never really played. They moved him to second. So moving Jackie wasn't necessarily something big. It was just, they talk about moving Jackie, or the media talked about it, and it did kind of create some sort of, I don't know, want to call it a rivalry necessarily, but Jackie's comments in the media were, well, we'll see when he gets to spring training to see how good he really is, and that sort of thing. He's going to have to be good to take my spot. And I don't know that he necessarily took Jackie's spot. Defensively, sure, he went to the same position, but more moved Billy Cox, or the Dodgers still had a problem in left field. They hadn't had consistent play in left field, so Jackie spent some time out in left field, and ultimately Gilliam would get put into the lineup in left field. But they got along well. I don't know that they were best friends, but, I would say this. Gilliam was a pallbearer at Jackie Robinson's funeral in 1972. Jackie was much more outspoken than Gilliam was, certainly after Jackie left baseball, and some of the critiques that he had about Major League Baseball and things like that. Those were not things that Gilliam ever voiced publicly. I think they got along fine. And I do recall talking to black players, in particularly people like Pee Wee Oliver, and then later Dusty Baker with the 60s and the 70s eras, that talked about how just as Jackie had mentored Gilliam. Gilliam was mentoring young black players and telling them about the Negro Leagues and telling them about the experience, so that that wasn't lost to history.
He kind of has this career where he's always the underdog. He's never really given a spot. It's always up in the air what's going to happen. What is coconut snatching, and what does that have to do with Jim Gilliam?
So coconut snatching is this thing that is defined and identified in a book called The Dodger Way to Play Baseball that was written in the 1950s. And the idea of coconut snatching is you get your best player, the best players that you have, and you put them in positions, even if it's not their natural position or what they have grown up doing, you put them in a place that will help the team be successful. And the Dodgers really had a tradition of doing this. Jackie Robinson is probably the first person to do that when they got him and put him at first base. That's not his natural position, not what he's been used to playing. And Gilliam was that. I mean, he initially, when he joined the Nashville Black Vols, he was a third baseman, got moved to second base when he joined the Eli Giants. George Scales was very influential in moving him to second base. And then, so he got kind of characterized as a second baseman. And then he gets to Montreal, and in the very first game, the left fielder for Montreal in 1951 is ejected. And Walter Alston, the manager, says, "Okay, Gilliam, you're going to go play left field." And Jim's like, and I shrugged my shoulders, like I know that he shrugged his shoulders. I don't know that he did, but he went out there. And the story goes that the first fly ball that came to him, he dropped. But from that point on, he learned to play left field. And throughout his major league career, Gilliam played at every position except shortstop, pitcher, and catcher. He played all three outfield positions. He played a couple of innings at first base, second base, third base. He played anywhere that the Dodgers wanted him to go. And the Dodgers, you see that a lot in today's game still. They value that position versatility. Kike Hernandez has had a long career with the Dodgers. Chris Taylor, until just recently, had a long career. And they played all over the diamond. And the Dodgers did that in the 70s with people like Lee Lacy. Joe Ferguson was a catcher that also played in the outfield. Bill Russell, shortstop and an outfielder. Davey Lopes was originally drafted as an outfielder. Steve Garvey was originally a third baseman. So they move these players around and get them into these different positions. And, I tell the story in the book. I had talked to Bobby Valentine and Billy Grabarkowitz, players from the early 70s Dodgers, that's what the Dodgers did with them. And both of them were a little critical to it, that they said that, it kind of ruined their career a little bit, and that they never really focused on one position. They were playing second base, third base, shortstop, those different kind of infield positions. And they would both, Valentine and Grabarkowitz would both be traded as part of that Frank Robinson trade to the Angels. And then they would spend years in the majors, but they never really panned out as much as they were hopeful. One quick note, just as evidence of this, Gilliam is one of three Dodgers to start opening day at three different positions. Bill Buckner started first base, left field, and right field. Pedro Guerrero has started at first base, third base, and one of the outfield positions, I think, left. And then Gilliam started second base, third base, and left field. So he has started three different opening days, or at three different positions on opening day.
Jeez. I'm going to jump out. So you mentioned earlier, he wins 4 World Series titles. 1955, the Dodgers kind of win the World Series because of a play that he doesn't make. What happens? Yeah.
%. Yeah. So the Dodgers, that season, Walter Alston really employed a heavy platoon. And it involved Don Zimmer playing second base, batting right-handed. It involved Sandy Amorose, a left-handed bat, and left field. And depending on who was on the mound, Gilliam would either be in left field or second base. So when a lefty is on the mound, Zimmer is in the lineup at second, and Gilliam goes to left. Game 7 of that 1955 World Series, that's the starting lineup, is that Zimmer is at second and Gilliam's in left. The Dodgers, as you know, they're clinging to this 2-0 lead, or maybe it was 1-0 at the time. They're trying to push across more runs. So the Dodgers pinch hit for Don Zimmer with a left-handed bat and move Gilliam before the Yankees come to bat, move him to second base and insert Sandy Amorose in left field. Well, of course, the play that occurs with runners at first and second, and this fly ball down the line by Yogi Berra that's tailing toward the left field foul line. And Amorose, who it throws lefty and has his glove on his right hand, is able to reach for the ball without reaching across his body and makes the catch. And then turns and relays to Pee Wee Reese, and Reese relays it to Hodges, and they double up. There's no way Gilliam makes that play if he's in left field, because he's going to have to reach across his body because he throws right-handed. And It's Zimmer joked, I think, in his, I'm going to butcher the exact quote on it, but he joked in one of his autobiographies that he was so good that the Dodgers could win the World Series without him in the lineup, because he recognized that him moving out allowed Gilliam to go to second base. So yeah, that helps seal the World Series for the Dodgers, brings home that title. And you wonder, maybe Gilliam would have made it. He was fast. He wasn't real fast, but he was quick. And certainly that's a play that throughout his career, I mean, you talked about him being kind of unassuming. This was a play that he could have been at the center of, and he wasn't, but he was still involved in the team and still a part of it.
Well, let's jump ahead to something where he is kind of the center. So 1965 is a interesting year for him. It kind of starts off with him kind of retiring.
Yeah, no.
It's a strange year. And then Game 7 of the 65 World Series, probably his career highlight. He makes a fantastic play. What happens in that World Series on that play?
Yeah, so I mean, this is actually the way I begin the book, with that play, because I think it's emblematic of the fact that Gilliam was at the center of a lot of things, but didn't always get the credit, the recognition. So the 1964 season was statistically his worst. It's his age 36 season. Just the Dodgers as a team struggled. They had a great year in 63, swept the Yankees in 4 straight games in the World Series. Gilliam got MVP votes in 63, but really just tailed off in 64. Toward the end of the 64 season, the Dodgers announced that they're going to move on from Leo DeRocher as a base coach, and that Gilliam will retire. And the Dodgers kind of initiated this more, I think, than Gilliam did. Gilliam will retire and become the first base coach for the Dodgers. And so he begins the 65 season in that way. Toward the end of May, and the Dodgers during that era were not scoring a lot of offensive runs. Their entire offensive strategy was to get Maury Wills on first, get him over to second somehow, try to get him to third, and then let Tommy Davis, Wes Parker, somebody drive him in with a fly ball, Frank Howard, one of those types. I mean, that was basically their offense. And Tommy Davis slides into second base and breaks his ankle in May 1965. And the Dodgers need something else offensively. They need some more position versatility. Davis was actually playing some third base as well as the outfield. So they activate Gilliam, and he becomes a player coach. And this is in late May, early June of 65. And he doesn't do a whole lot right away. He kind of pinch hits. But then ultimately he settles in at third base, and the Dodgers wind up with this all switch hitting infield of Wes Parker at first, Jim Lefebvre at second, Maury Wills at short, and Gilliam at third. So the 1965 World Series comes along, and Gilliam is starting at third base. Throughout the season, he was replaced late innings for defensive purposes by John Kennedy, a player that the Dodgers had acquired from the Senators prior to the season, who is an excellent fielder, not much on the offense. So Gilliam is starting. It's the 6th inning of the Dodgers game. They're up 2-0 again, similar score to what it was in the 1955 World Series. Sandy Koufax is having a hard time doing anything except throwing fastball for strikes. Nothing else is landing for him. He can't get the curveball. He gets runners on first and second with 1 out, and Zoilo Versalles, who will become the AL MVP that year for the Twins, comes up to bat. And he has been just timing up the Dodger pitcher all series. Pulled the ball earlier in the series down the third baseline that Gilliam had bounce off his chest for an error. He has been just all over the fastball. So Gilliam, with first at second and 1 out, cheats over to the third baseline a little bit. And sure enough, Versalles hits this screaming line drive, and you can go on YouTube and watch the replay of it. And there's a couple of pictures in the book about it. But he backhands the ball, goes into foul territory, scrambles to his feet, runs over, touches third base, and forces Frank Quilisi, the runner coming down from second. Only gets 1 out, no double play, but it killed the Twins' momentum. Koufax retires the next batter. They hold serve, and you can listen to Vin Scully and Ray Scott, who are the broadcasters, if you go on YouTube and you find this, talking about how Gilliam saved Koufax's bacon, and you can hear kind of the air quotes when they say, and John Kennedy takes over for Jim Gilliam for defensive purposes late in the game. And Gilliam actually watched the bottom of the 9th inning in the Dodger clubhouse with Vin Scully, who had gone down there to do post-game interviews. He wasn't even in the dugout for the final out of that. But it was his play, and he joked about it afterward, called it a $3,000 play, because that was roughly the difference between the World Series winning team share and the losing team share.
He seemed like he was pretty beloved by teammates. What was Jim, the person, like?
Very quiet. He loved, I don't think would be inaccurate to say that he was a baseball rat. He just loved being at the ballpark, loved, helping people. Players that played for him and players that played with him unanimously talked about what a calming influence he was. He was very much a high baseball IQ player, would pick up on little tendencies of things and help somebody along. John Warhas, who was one of those players in the 60s, Darrell Griffith, Pee Wee Oliver, some of these players that were brought up to try and challenge Gilliam for his spots. Gilliam would help him. He wouldn't view it as competition. He was there to help them be better baseball players. None of the three of those really went on to substantial major league careers. Gilliam kept his spot as a result of that. But he was a good dresser. People always talked about how well he dressed. He was a pretty good golfer. Loved to be out on the golf course. Doug Rao, a pitcher for the 1970s, told me he spent more time on golf courses than in baseball games with Gilliam. Talked to him more on the golf course than anywhere else. Was a great card player. Was pretty aggressive card playing wise. Ron Say tells me the story that in their team plane that they had multiple card tables set up, and the back of the plane was reserved for those that were very serious. And he never played at that table, but he would watch, and he said, I never saw any money change hands, but I think Jim did pretty well. He got along with everybody. It didn't matter whether it was black or white. He seemed like he was very much a player's coach, good teammate, somebody who was revered. And I think, again, the fact that so many people that I was able to talk to had such reverence for him spoke to how much they enjoyed their association with him.
I usually hear him referred to as Junior Gilliam. He has another nickname, the Devil.
Yeah.
Where does this come from?
So the Devil's nickname, and that was one that was really reserved for players and teammates, was allegedly, as the story goes, in spring training in Vero Beach. The Dodgers, Vero Beach itself, Dodgertown, was integrated, but the city of Vero Beach wasn't in the 90s. And the black players would go to a small town, Gifford, that was close by, which was more of the black community. And the story goes that Gilliam walked into a pool hall and slapped $20 down on the pool table and said, "Who wants a piece of the devil?" And nobody challenged him to it, but the devil nickname stuck. Later, somebody said, I found a quote from him, somebody asked him, what would they have done if somebody had challenged him? And he said, I would have picked up my $20 and walked out the door. But the devil stuck. Dusty Baker, when I was talking to him, just kept calling him the devil. I mean, he didn't even call him Jim or anything like that. Junior was a nickname that he picked up. George Scales gave him that with the Baltimore Eli Giants. And really, when the Dodgers moved to Los Angeles, it really transitioned to Jim. And the Brooklyn Dodger fans from that era still call him Junior. They will always call him Junior. But he's been Jim Gilliam for a long time.
So he does become the first black base coach, which is, again, a real barrier being broken down there. Does he want to manage? Is he ever really seriously considered to manage?
So those are, I'm going to take those questions as two different things. Does he want to manage? Hard to say. I did have a chance to talk with Edwina, his widow, and she said, Jim was just happy doing whatever the Dodgers wanted him to do. He was very much a company man, 27 years in the Dodgers organization with his minor league stint, major league stint, coaching stint. He was just happy doing whatever they wanted to do. He was talked about a lot in the media as a potential manager. He was quoted in the media saying, well, I just hope I get my chance. The only chance that he did have was he managed the San Juan Senadores in the Puerto Rican League 1974, that winter season. And he managed the team to a better than 500 record. They didn't have a ton of talent, but he did a pretty good job. I did talk to some players that were on that team that had brief major league careers. Baylor Moore, Tom Walker, Eliseo Rodriguez. And they all said, he was very talented. He could have been a great manager. I asked Dusty Baker about that as well. And Dusty said, I just don't think Jim wanted the spotlight. He didn't want the media attention. He didn't want to have to deal with all that. He was much more of a baseball tactician than he was the PR person. And so when you compare that to Tommy Lasorda, who ultimately took over for Walter Alston, and Tommy is this gregarious individual with this larger than life personality and all that, it would have been hard for him to compete against Lasorda from that component of it. And Lasorda did make him his hitting coach right away for the 1977 season as well, so gave him a bit of a promotion. But Jim never got that chance. He was mentioned quite a bit at that little gate of integration, but never was given that opportunity.
So he does get his number retired by the Dodgers. We kind of talked about how he may not have the numbers for a Hall of Fame case, but it's certainly worth considering. But title of your book, he does kind of become forgotten. How does he become forgotten? How a guy of his stature who was on all these championship teams, who has his number retired, what happens to Jim and how does this happen?
I mean, so I think that's a nuanced question, of course. I think there's a lot of things that kind of worked against him to create a legacy and create that. He never had a permanent position. I mean, he started nearly as many games at second base as he did at third base. He started several hundred games in the outfield, so he doesn't have that permanent role. He wasn't a big power hitter. He did little things, moved runners along, hit behind Maury Wills, allowed Maury Wills, took a bunch of pitches so that Maury Wills could try and steal, those sorts of unsung things. He has some statistics that when you start rattling these things off, you're like, wow, that's pretty impressive. He's the only player in baseball history to hit a home run in the Negro League's East-West All-Star Game and a Major League Baseball All-Star Game. But it was only on 2 or 3 All-Star teams. He got some MVP votes a couple of years. He was a Rookie of the Year, but he's a career 265 Major League Baseball hitter. It doesn't really profile as somebody like that. He is still in the Dodgers' top 10 in a lot of offensive categories, plate appearances, walks, things like that. He was a part of all of these things. He was really very much kind of a connective tissue between Brooklyn, Los Angeles, and the World Series teams of the 50s and the World Series teams of the 60s. He's really the only person that did that. His number was retired. You alluded to that right after he passed away. It was announced at his funeral on October 10th, 1978, that the Dodgers would retire his number. And I asked about that because at the time that I was doing the interviews for the book, he was the only Dodger to have his number retired who was not in the Hall of Fame. And I asked both Fred Clare, who was the general manager of the former general manager of the Dodgers, but was not the GM at that time, but he was involved in the front office. And I asked Peter O'Malley, who was the owner of the Dodgers, president of the organization after Walter O'Malley passed away. And both of them stood by their decision. And they said, look, at the time, 1978, the only Dodgers with their numbers retired were Koufax, Jackie Robinson, Roy Campanella, and Walter Alston. There was no real precedent for doing this. But at the time, what they knew is, here's a guy that had spent 27 years in the Dodgers organization, done whatever we wanted him to do. He was emblematic of who the Dodgers want, the kind of culture that they want in their organization. And there was a lot of pushback from the fans about, as we got closer to the 2020s, where Gil Hodges' number hadn't been retired, but he wasn't in the Hall of Fame. Well, as soon as he got elected to the Hall of Fame, the Dodgers did retire 14. And now the Dodgers have retired 2 numbers of players that are not in the Hall of Fame because they subsequently retired Fernando Valenzuela's 34. So you've got 2 players not in the Hall of Fame now. But everybody else, from Don Drysdale at number 53 down to Pee Wee Reese at number 1, everybody else that's number is retired is in the Hall.
Yeah. I got one more for you here. There's a poem about Jim, Pete Fairchild, I believe.
Yeah. Absolutely.
How did you come across it? It's great.
So, again, part of the research process is I set up these Google alerts for Jim Gilliam, Junior Gilliam, things like that. And all of a sudden I get this Google alert, and there was some literary site that had published a poem from Pete Fairchild. And I knew nothing of this existence. So I reached out to the person that had written the piece about Pete. I mean, it was a piece about Pete Fairchild, not so much about Jim Gilliam. And so I reached out to this guy. I said, hey, do you have Fairchild's contact information? And so I did reach out to Pete Fairchild and did get in touch with him, traded emails. He was gracious and said, yeah, you can reprint that. I have his permission to reprint it. So it is in the book, For Junior Gilliam. And that's the title of it, For Junior Gilliam, 1928 to 1978. And I asked Pete, why'd you write this? And what was his story? And so that's part of the thing as well. He grew up as a baseball fan in rural Kansas and enjoyed playing baseball. Very little baseball talent, but loved it. And he was always fascinated by Jim Gilliam and talked about how he would take his baseball card. He was playing right field. He'd take his baseball cards out to the outfield because not a lot happens in Pee Wee baseball in right field sometimes. And so he was looking at things, and he was just always struck by reading the back of Jim Gilliam or Junior Gilliam's, Topps baseball cards from the 1950s. And so it became his favorite player.
I love that. Well, Steve, great having you back. We'll have you back again when you hopefully not for the same book, but if you have another book, we'll have you back for sure. Always a pleasure. The book is fantastic.
Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate the time.
That was Stephen Dittmore. His book, Jim Gilliam, The Forgotten Dodger, is out now. We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. Until next time,